Okay, so once again, welcome to the our 3-session class on Fiddler on the Roof. We have at the moment 81 of you, and you hopefully can see the results of the polling. So 75% of those responding have seen both a movie and a live show, and there's the a majority of you have seen the show between 3 and 5 times. Some of you more than that, and some of you fall into the don't ask category. And 16% have actually had them or a family member act in the show. So I am going to once again, I'm muting everyone and stopping the sharing. And so let me go into a brief PowerPoint presentation. And I will ask just for a thumbs up. Gigi, can you see it? Because I can see you on my screen. Okay, great. Okay, so the name of our little discussion here is Jewish Insights from Fiddler on the Roof. I'm just going to get the chat room so I can see it. Okay, really not that much going on. Okay, so so the subject again is Fiddler on the Roof, and it is my contention that there's a lot going on here, and my focus is to really study this the way I would study a text, because I believe there's a lot to be learned by viewing the material carefully, and in some cases I will even stop, pause the presentation so you can see some interesting things going on again next 3 Wednesdays. Once again, I am supported in my work, and the reason I can offer this program to you without charging is because I'm supported by the Jewish Federation of Ventura County. And in my emails reminding you of this class, I do send a link if you are interested in making a donation. I would appreciate it, and they would appreciate it. My usual approach, which I will continue, is to have materials on my website. If you go to my website, you'll see a link for classes, and there's a description of this class. There's a registration spot, and you'll be able to click for recording, and I will be posting the recording later tonight or tomorrow, and I'll also post a copy of these slides. So there's, in my readings, there's just a bunch of interesting things going on, which was new to me. The show, of course, was produced in 1964, set in Russia in 1905, based on the stories of Sholem Aleichem. Sholem Aleichem is a pen name for the author. There were a lot of achievements of the show on Broadway. It was the first Broadway musical to run for more than 3,000 performances. It won 9 Tony Awards. I'm not going to read the list of the awards. You can glance at it. And it got a special award in 1972 for the longest running musical in Broadway history. That record has since been eclipsed, but it held the record for 10 years. In terms of stage, it won a total of 20 awards in various locations and was nominated for an additional 37 awards. In terms of the movie, 1971, a number of Oscars, I guess, which are mentioned there, and again, 9 total awards and 11 additional nominations. One of the things that's fun when you read it about the material, and I think this is true of some of the online discussions as well, is the opening reviews weren't all uniformly praising the show. So it opened in, I think, in Detroit. I can't remember if it's Detroit or Cleveland first. And you had remarks like, everything is ordinary about Fiddler except Zero Mostel. Here's one I bet the writer wishes he had never written. The songs are unmemorable, the sets, costumes, and lighting merely serviceable, direction workmanlike, choreography pedestrian. But here's my favorite. I think this one was Cleveland. He said, there isn't a hit or catchy tune in the score. See how that one turned out. as they were putting ideas, the show together and looking for backers, people were skeptical that such a Jewish show could be a commercial success. And one of the early backers asked the question, when we run out of Hadassah benefits, what other audience would we expect to entertain? One thing I had no idea about is there were, over all of the preparation and putting things in, taking things out, some 50 different songs written for the show. I've actually done a little bit of searching. I wish I could find some of these songs. And at the opening, it's a little unclear whether Marc Chagall was actually there, but he was definitely invited to the Broadway opening. And Shalom Aleicham's daughter and granddaughter were at the opening. And also during in 1967, in June of 67, Topol, who was in the London production, had to leave the production for a short period of time to go and support Israel during the Six-Day War. This was kind of funny, and this was mentioned in one of the documentaries. The director-producer of the film is Norman Jewison, and he was selected, and he admitted to being nervous about breaking to the United Artists the fact that he's a goy, in his words, that he's not Jewish. So he said to them, "What would you think if I told you I'm a goy?" And the chairman's response, which was either heartfelt or just very quick, was, "Why do you think we asked you to direct the film? We don't want a piece of Yiddish kitsch." Norman married, I think remarried after the movie, and Sunrise Sunset was played at his wedding. And at his wedding, although he's not Jewish and his bride was not Jewish, he actually had a rabbi marry them, a rabbi that he met in the course of this work, had a chuppah. And the cast in Yugoslavia, where the filming took place, was so happy with him that they made him an honorary Jew, and changed his name to Norman Christensen. So we have Christensen the Jew and Jewison the Christian. This was also interesting, one of the books. Danny Kaye, who emphasized that he really was a Russian Jew, real name David Daniel Kaminsky, really wanted to be in the movie as Tevye. But Jewison thought he was too red-haired, too light on his feet, and too professional. And Jewison even turned down Frank Sinatra, who wanted to be in the film. Shocking. I think Jewison's agent, maybe Sinatra's agent, because no one had ever turned down Sinatra before. And I think many of you know that the violin music that we hear is actually played by Isaac Stern. Just some images. So here's an image of Shalom Aleichem with his granddaughter in 1912. Belle Kaufman, apparently she wrote Up the Down Staircase. When you see the rabbi in the film, take a close look at him, because Jewison took this book of photographs by Roman Vishniak and said, "This is what I want the rabbi to look like." And he looks almost exactly like this. And this is something I didn't know, and I didn't see in the documentary. A number of actors and actresses got their Broadway debut, including one young Bette Midler in the Broadway show, and also Adrienne Barbeau. You will hear in the documentary, and that this show has been shown all over the world. And it was a particularly big hit in Japan, because the Japanese thought this was such a Japanese story. So one of the interesting things going on here is, what makes this a Japanese story? And this was a production in Bozeman, Montana. This was the first time I ever put this idea in place. I was actually teaching about a Talmudic concept called Kal V'chomer. We'll get there. It's a Talmudic interpretive concept. And I mentioned that the song To Life is a great example of it. And I remember thinking, this was during Torah study, I remember thinking and mentioning this would make a great class. And so we actually put it on in Bozeman, Montana. This is my successor in Bozeman. And it turned out in Bozeman, Montana, there was a high school production of Fiddler on the Roof. There's Tevye. I think most of the students, certainly Tevye, were Mormon. And he really, the guy who played Tevye, got a very good Yiddish accent. I was very, very impressed. Let's see. So we've seen some resources. These are the books. A book by Alyssa Solomon called Wonder of Wonders. This one is fantastic. Barbara Eisenberg, called Tradition, fairly new book. And then you can certainly find the collected stories. So as I mentioned earlier, I'll be pausing the recording of the class during the film, which allows me to post it on YouTube. Jot your questions in the chat. After each film clip, we'll have a brief discussion. I'll try to address your questions. And then either during or afterwards, we'll just see how it goes. Oh, I already gave the poll. We'll see how it goes, how much discussion we can have in general. And then I just wanted to mention, I've been invited to give a TEDx talk. I think TEDx is a local form of TED. I really don't know. But on Saturday, March 20th, I will be talking about a program called How Translation Changed History. And so I'll be focusing, it'll be a short talk, about 20 minutes, about how various translations of the Hebrew Bible have actually affected not only the development of Christianity, but our culture. And I hope some of you can attend. There is voluntary donations. You can go to TEDxoxnard.com and register for the program. It will be online, and I'm sure I'll be able to get the recordings. So I think that's it. Yes, that's it. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment, and I will ask Nikki, I don't know if you still have your hand raised or you wanted to say something. You're muted. You're still muted. Okay, I'm not sure. Okay, I guess you just lowered your hand. Okay, so one of the interesting things I want you to think about is why the film is called Fiddler on the Roof. Clearly, there's a lot going on with this image of a fiddler. I want to just rattle off briefly other names that were suggested for the show. Tevye, A Village Story, To Life, Listen to the Fiddle, Make a Circle, Once There Was a Town, To Light a Candle, My Village, Three Brides and a Man, A Village Tune, Homemade Wine, Not So Long Ago, Where Papa Came From. So I'll give you my thoughts on this, and I will be interested in your own thoughts as well. As you'll hear Tevye talk about why we like A Fiddler on the Roof, because it's dangerous, it's unstable. We're always close to a fall. So remember, this is the story of the Jewish people. We are always unstable throughout our history. We're always close to a fall, and it's scary, and it's unusual to have a fiddler on the roof. And it's also not easily understood. All of these things, I think, can apply to us as a people. And then a little bit deeper, we're always dancing to music that we alone can hear. And I would say that's the music of the covenant. Jews have a special relationship with God, with each other, and not everybody gets it. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's not that many Jews in the world. The percentage of Jews in the world is 0.2%. There's about roughly 2% of the United States is Jewish, and about 0.2% of the world is Jewish. A fiddle is small and portable. There's a program about the violins of the Holocaust, and that was one of the things that emphasized a fiddle is something you can easily take with you. And I mentioned Isaac Stern is the actual fiddler. Just some more interesting things about the show itself. Within a decade, the show had already played in 24 countries. I don't know if this was in a decade, but there has been at least 15 separate productions in Finland. It has been done in total about in 130 countries worldwide. I mentioned the awards. It's estimated that the movie has been seen by more than 1 billion people. And early on, the question was raised as the writers are putting this together and they're trying to figure out what's the dialogue, what's the song. The question was raised, what is this show about? What's the point of the show? And somebody gave sort of the obvious answer that a dairyman and his daughters, is the point of the show. Just the story of Russia and this particular group. And the response was, no, it's no good. If that's what the show is about, then this show could be called The Previous Adventures of the Goldbergs. Some of us will remember, the Goldbergs back in television in the 50s. So that would be The Previous Adventures of the Goldbergs. And what the bottom line for the writers were that they finally came up with is the purpose of the show is about a dissolution of a way of life, and the sort of the as traditions change with modernity. And that's why the Japanese thought this was such a Japanese show. In fact, I think there's a quote somewhere, it was in the documentary, that a Japanese director was amazed that the show was successful in the United States. And when asked why he was so amazed, his response was, because it's such a Japanese story. And I don't know if you saw pictures. Yeah, I did show you pictures of the Japanese actors. One thing I discovered, actually not in any of these books, but I pursued it. The question is, why did Zero Mostel have the nickname Zero? He was not given that name at birth. You won't be surprised to learn. And the answer is, he was not that great a student, and his mother kept telling him if he didn't apply himself more at school, he would grow up to be a zero. And as it turned out, she was absolutely right. It's also true and tragic that Mostel died at 62, at the age of 62, of a burst aorta. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to pause the recording. And we are going to start the recording, for those of you who are watching this without seeing the benefit of all the clips, really with the opening, just after the opening credits or just before, I can't even remember. But basically 2 minutes into the show with the presentation of the song Tradition. Okay, so I'm going to share some of my own thoughts about this, and then, well, let's just see how this works. I'm going to open it up. What would you say is the essence of Judaism as you see it from this perspective? So the simplest thing I see, Louise, you have your hand up. I don't know if you're wanting to answer. Oh, it's Jane Simon. No, Louise. So Jane, why don't you chime in?
I think, and I will preface this by saying, I probably was the only Jew who really hated Fiddler on the Roof.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's going to be really interesting to see what your attitude is after the class.
But I've become more knowledgeable, and I accept it now.
Okay.
I feel that Fiddler on the Roof is a microcosm of the Jewish people.
Okay, I certainly agree with that. What are the essences of Jewish practice and traditions that you get from this opening film? Louise, I don't know if you're wanting to answer something, or is there anybody else? Okay, Gigi, it's actually helpful if you do it with electronically, because there's 85 people and I can't necessarily see you all on the screen. But go ahead, Gigi.
Shabbat, the challah, the chickens, the Hebrew school, all the ritual things that we, some of which we still do. We might not be plucking the chickens, but you go to summer camp at Shabbat and they're serving you chicken.
Okay,
and
thank
got
you.
your chalot.
Okay, and Barbara.
Yes, at least at the beginning of the film, there are all very fixed roles. What the father does, the mother, the sons and the daughters. So at least at the beginning, everybody has their role.
Mhm. And I would say one of the things that's really going on in this film and at the heart of the film is the breakdown of roles, particularly in the way women are treated. There's lots of hands up. I'm going to take just a few more. Michelle and Richard, haven't seen you guys in a long time. So it is, I'm going to
You know, this movie
go to speaker
always-
view so I can get a good view of you.
Oh, I
Yes,
mute?
Endowed
yes,
roles.
you're good.
Hi, Michael. Mwah. To you, Michael, and everybody else we know. I gotta say, this movie always feels to me as an Ashkenazi Jew, like it's reflecting something in my DNA.
Mhm.
The food, the traditions, the prayers, the little bit that sort of always has felt so familiar in my DNA almost from
And
having a family like that, you know.
And I am going to specifically comment on DNA. So
Okay,
I'll take Jerry and Cheryl, and then I will add my own thoughts.
Yeah. So to your question, what do we take away from the section of the film that you showed? Tradition is, I mean, yeah, the word's repeated over and over, but that's it. For 500 years, they developed a system on how they lived, and this is how they lived, and that's what they did, and that's about to change. It's classic, in a sense. It's classic situational comedy. You have a situation, and all of a sudden, Lucy does something and it changes, and now here's what happens after that. But we're talking about a 500-year setup, and then something changes, which is just incredible.
Thank you. And Cheryl? These are my East Coast buddies, so they're staying up very late to watch this, participate.
Well, a couple of things. One is when he said that, he doesn't know why we wear prayer shawls when he was looking at his garment. Well, if he read the Torah, then he knows it says in the Torah to wear that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but to me, it reflects a political statement of even now of why we're having issues in this country of people who don't want to accept change and move on.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I am gonna share.
Can I say as a milkman,
Whoops, I'm sorry, I muted you, Jerry. Let me move on, because we could talk for the rest of the hour and a half about this show. So one of the essence of things going on here is the idea that the traditions reflect the fact that we know what God expects us to do. And you can see it certainly in Tevye that this is very comforting. This is, I think, unique or very different in Judaism than other religions. We have this sense that the laws, the mitzvot, are a reflection of what God expects of us. And it's very comforting to have a set of rules and regulations. I may not obey all of them, but at least I have a sense of what God expects me to do. And of course, Judaism, as I emphasize whenever I'm teaching, focuses much more on what you're supposed to do rather than what you're supposed to believe. And as Cheryl pointed out, you may not even know why you're supposed to do it. He says, why do we keep our heads covered with these funny little hats? I haven't found a clear indication of that. There's a lot of theories, but nobody really knows. As Cheryl points out, the tzitzit are in the Torah. They remind us of the commandments. But in fact, if you run across many very traditional Jews, they will know with great precision what to do, not necessarily why to do it. People commented on the specific roles for people. And again, I'm clearly focusing on the religious part of it. So one of the things that's the role of the Papa is to say the daily prayers. In Judaism, you pray because it's a mitzvah. The Hebrew word mitzvah means commandment. You are required to say 3 daily prayers a day. It doesn't matter if you want to. It doesn't matter if you're into it. It doesn't matter if you say it with feeling, with kavanah. You have to get it done. There's an expression in Hebrew called yotze. Yotze means I've taken it off my to-do list. I've fulfilled my obligation. And even one of the elements of Mama's role is to give Papa the time to read the holy books. There's blessings for everything. Again, I could talk a lot about that. I'm going to restrain myself. And of course, the joke is that there's even a blessing for the czar. And you saw the argument. I don't know if you realize this, but some Jews argue with other Jews. And in fact, we're going to come back to DNA. I think we breed for this kind of propensity. I'll say more about that in the context of another song, but that's the way we learn. We argue with each other. It is a Jewish tendency. I once had a very close friend of mine who started dating a non-Jew, and at the dinner table, he told me it was so weird. We just sat at the table and somebody said, pass the butter. And somebody said, pass the salt. And somebody said, this tastes good. And nobody argued. Nobody screamed at each other. He said it felt like it was not a real experience. I don't know if you noticed, but the women in the synagogue were behind the mechitza. I think many of you know this, that women sit in a separate area. And then, of course, there's this idea of living next to the non-Jewish community. I think the woman that Tevye delivers the milk to is not Jewish based on her dress. So there is interaction between the Jewish world and the non-Jewish world, different than the Amish, for example. Jews are interacting with the non-Jewish world. And I came across in one of these sources that there really was a Tevye who delivered milk and cheese and sour cream to Shalom Aleichem. So that there was an actual milkman Tevye that he based these stories on. And then I also think it's instructive and interesting that this basic deal, he says, so far we don't bother them, they don't bother us. And that ultimately is the basic deal. This, I think, is the huge arc of Jewish history. In the year 70, when the Second Temple is destroyed, Judaism makes a choice. And the choice is not to continue as a nation like other nations with land, with a king, with an army, and so on, not to even try. We can get into details of Jewish history, but basically the rabbis selected a place, Yavna, where they would set up an academy. And the basic ideal, the basic deal between Jews and the rest of the world that begins at that time is this. We will stay way over here. I'm going to try and get in the corner of my little screen. We will stay way over here, and we'll have our little shul, and we'll have our own language, and we'll have our own laws, and we're not going to have a king. Don't worry. We're not going to have an army. We're not going to attack you. You don't have to be worried about us. And we will be a nation. Up until recently, everybody understood Judaism as a nationality, as a people. We will be a nation living amongst other nations, and that's how we're going to make this thing work. And until, with pogroms and everything else, Jews clung to this idea, clung to the idea of powerlessness until the rise of Zionism, where the Zionists concluded that it's immoral to allow yourselves to be slaughtered. And of course, the Holocaust being the ultimate statement of that. So with that, I am going to move on to the next discussion, the next song, which is Matchmaker, including the dialogue for Matchmaker. And for those of you that are watching, I'm going to go to about 18 minutes into the show. So I'm going to pause the recording. Recording is back on. So some of you may have noticed at the very beginning, we didn't actually see the matchmaker in the scene. It's Molly Pecan, who was a well-known actress in the Yiddish theater. Murray asked the question, and a couple of you have responded, Yenta is a Yiddish term for gossip. I'll just make a couple of comments, and then I'm going to ask your own comments, and I'm going to ask you a question. First, you notice one of the daughters is redheaded. My understanding is that the only two peoples that are redheaded are Jews and Irish. I don't know for sure if that's true, but she's clearly redheaded, and some of you may know redheaded Jews.
Danny Kaye was a redheaded Jew.
Yeah, and Danny Kaye, and so he couldn't be Tevye. But evidently the daughter was still okay. So here is my question. What are the attributes of a desirable husband according to the girls? And first, again, Louise, I see you have your hand up, and I don't know if if you want to say something because I can't see your image. Okay, I don't. Louise isn't responding. So David and Evelyn.
Our granddaughter is redhead,
Okay, great, great, great.
and her eyebrows are red, and her
Okay.
eyelashes are red.
Yeah. Okay.
I was born with red hair.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have to belabor that one, Jerry.
Well, for Mama, for Papa, make him a scholar. For
Mhm.
Mama, make him rich as a king. And for me, well, I wouldn't mind somebody good looking. So
Okay.
they all love
So the
me.
girls wanted somebody good looking, and if you remember, the redhead Chava says, you bring the ring, I'll bring the veil, you bring the groom. How is she describing this?
Slender and pale.
Slender and pale. Is that our image of the handsome guy these days?
Well,
Gigi.
he's not today, but back then that meant he was probably hunched over his Talmudic books. He
Working.
wasn't getting much. He wasn't
Indoors.
getting much sun if he was studying Torah.
Right.
Yeah. So what is slender and pale? Would you describe Tevye as slender and pale?
He's a milkman.
No.
He's not a scholar.
So one of the issues between I'm going to mute folks. One of the issues about being pale is it means you are indoors. And Gigi, you mentioned it. That was an indication that he was hunched over books. And my wife is from Morocco, and the lighter you were, this is racist, I would say, the lighter you were, the more desirable you were. She's in a world where there's Mediterranean folks. And part of that, though, is that it meant you worked indoors or you didn't have to work at all. The middle daughter, I can't remember the daughter's name. The middle daughter wanted to marry the rabbi's son, one rabbi, one son. She probably was not going to get him. Why? With no money, no dowry, no family background. So the ideal woman, the most marriageable woman, needs money, dowry, and family. The ideal man is a scholar. So I learned this from a non-Jewish biologist who made what I consider to be a fascinating point, that Jews, remember I said I was going to talk about DNA. His point, and I think he's right, but I don't have any proof of it, that Jews in this world selectively bred, in a DNA sense, for a particular type of knowledge. The most desirable guy in town was slender and pale and a scholar. And we actually know that from the Talmud that a scholar has to be sexually available to his wife every night, of course, except during nidah, during her period. And the most desirable woman had money and family, which meant she probably had some intelligence. And the scholar had a specific kind of intelligence. I've learned from my wife, who is a retired school psychologist, that there are different forms of intelligence. For example, I really like Hebrew and stuff like this. I am in the low moron stage on planning rooms and assembling things and figuring out where things go in physical puzzles. I mean, it's really pathetic how bad I am at that. But there are other things I'm good at. Jews bred literally for a particular type of knowledge, and that was discernment and analysis and intellectual study, not building great cathedrals, not building great buildings, not being sculptures, Marc Chagall, not being great artists, but these sort of intellectual pursuits. The best and the brightest spent all day in the yeshiva. You then look at the Christian world, and the best and the brightest in the Christian world became priests and soldiers, two disciplines that were specifically disinclined to breed a lot. So over the years, Jews developed this skill of literally bred for this type of skill. And that's one of the reasons why we have something like 100 times our expected share of Nobel Prizes. We're 0.2% of the world's population. We have about 20% of the Nobel Prizes in the world. Ivor.
Don't you
Yes.
think so in Europe, not necessarily just in Eastern Europe, but throughout, when the Jews weren't allowed in most of the professions, they had to develop the intellect for the things that they were allowed to do.
So I would agree with that, but we were also long before that breeding for this type of intellect. Ivor.
Yeah, Rabbi.
Yes.
I know you've got a long way to go, so I'll keep my observation short. The Jews of Northern Ireland, and my wife was one, are pale and freckle-faced. So that's number one. Going back to something you said, again, hitting two separate items, and it's not very Talmudic what I'm about to say. I remember interviewing Norman Jewison when the film first came out, and he said that he thought he got the role because they thought, as you said, his name was Jewison and he was Jewish. And he spent most of the time, like a month, telling people he wasn't Jewish. And you gave us the wonderful background to his wedding and what they played at his wedding. So that's number two. And the other thing I want to say is, and this is a fascinating little tidbit that I never knew, and I thought I knew a little bit about the film. Frank Sinatra as Tevye, Fly Me to the Ghetto. Come on.
Fly me to the roof and let me play among the shingles.
Yes.
Then we'll go to the village where we can dance and we can mingle. In other words,
yes.
It wouldn't work.
Yes, very good.
Yes,
I love that. Thank you.
By the way, one of the reasons I like musicals is I love the idea of bursting into song. And some of you know me very well and know that I do that. Yes, I agree with you. Sinatra probably wouldn't have been a convincing Tevye. And also
Rabbi,
when he's singing, if I was a rich man, everybody would know he was already rich. Yes.
Rabbi, the middle girl's name was Saito.
Yes, thank you.
And she wanted to marry Mazel the tailor instead of Laser Wolf.
No, that's the oldest.
No, that's the eldest.
It's
Hodel is the middle
the
girl.
oldest
Okay,
one.
stop. We are not going to argue about this because
why? Jews argue.
Yeah, I know. But because this one actually has a clear answer, and you will see it shortly. What I also want to point out is this is the beginning of the subversion. I think in the show it was clearer than in the movie that the girls are rebelling against this matchmaking system. They're not quite happy with it. And it's the beginning, and of course we see in the movie, each of the daughters rebels against this matchmaking system and ignores the matchmaking system in its own way. There's one item that came out, I think it was in one of the books I read. If I stop the film, I'm trying not to stop the film and point out stuff. The girls' armpits are clean shaven, if you may have noticed. In one of the books I read, the girls, when they went to Yugoslavia to film this, they wanted to be authentic. And so they stopped shaving their legs and their arms. And in one of these scenes, Jewison noticed that they had hairy armpits. They stopped the production. And I guess authenticity has its limits. Okay, so Ivor, I don't know if your hand is still up or because you want to add something, or you can take it down. And we will continue. We're doing okay with a wonderful song and the introduction to a rich man. And we're back recording. So, whoops, hold on, sorry. Making a mistake here, sorry. Okay, so a couple of things. First, what I would ask is, what is Tevye's relationship with God? What strikes you about Tevye's relationship with God? Both in the song and in the dialogue. Bryce. Whoops.
I would say he's a respectful friend. He treats him as somewhat subserviently, but with a great deal of respect. But he sees him as someone he can talk to.
Okay, Barbara.
And argue with. He argues with him and questions him and feels very comfortable doing that.
Okay, Barbara.
Yes, I would say it's a very personal relationship with God. And I just learned on Monday that there's a personal relationship or a transcendent relationship. And I would not call this transcendent. It's very personal.
Okay, David and Evelyn.
It's more like he's talking directly to God, and he's thinking that God is the only one that's listening.
Oh, that's interesting. That's
everyone around him can hear him, but only God can.
But also, I have to agree, it is a personal relationship, but that is, I think, a long-term Jewish concept, is that rabbis are not the intermediary like a priest is between person and God.
So I will just point out that the idea of a priesthood is a Jewish idea. It is biblically Jewish that we need a priesthood and a temple and sacrifice as an intermediary. Once the temple is destroyed, Judaism changed. So in that sense, Christianity is closer to biblical Judaism than is modern Judaism. I will,
Rabbi?
Barbara, hold on a second, Miriam. Barbara and Hal.
Yeah, one of the thoughts that I had, yes, I think his relationship with him, in his mind certainly, is very personal. However, he also, as he pointed out in the beginning, knows or thinks he knows what God expects of everybody. He said, we know what God expects of us. And that's part of the tradition, that when things start falling apart and they don't go the way he thinks God expects them to go, then he sees a breaking down of the tradition. And again, that brings us back to the main theme of the entire story.
Murray.
I was going to point out that in Genesis, God talks to Abraham and Abraham talks to God. But in this film, he talks to God, in a thou thy kind of way. But God doesn't talk to him. God speaks to him only in action, for instance, making his horse name.
And I would say that that reflects most of our experience. Gigi.
I picked this up from the documentary, and I think it's spot on. In that generation, you would think of God as a man, as a male, and God's the only guy he can talk to. He's surrounded by women.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Rabbi,
yeah, go ahead, Miriam.
I think that he's trying to make a bargain with God, saying that if he does everything he's supposed to and is a good man, he'll have so much more time to study the Torah and be a better Jew and stuff like that.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that. It's a very important point. I didn't really see it as a bargain, but it's an interesting idea. Richard and Michelle?
Yeah, Mike, I see, what I love is that Tevi is always talking to God, and it's almost a Torah lesson, that if you want to talk to God, you can talk to God anytime you want. There's a lesson here of availability of God for us. It's always there for you if you want to, and if you do, God will listen. It's busy person or busy thing, but you talk and you get listened to, and it feels good just to be listened to sometimes. Anyway.
Yeah, it's not very intellectual. I would say one of the elements of Reform and conservative Judaism in the last 100 years or so is to try and emphasize the intellectual aspects of Judaism. And there was a conscious attempt to downplay Kabbalah and the mystical elements. Bonnie Ray. Bonnie, you got to unmute yourself.
He hasn't unmuted.
There.
Okay, now you're there.
Unlike a friend, he believes that God determines his future, his life.
Unlike who? I'm sorry.
Unlike a friend.
Oh,
Like,
yeah, yes,
he believes that God
Yes.
controls his life.
yes.
That's
But the
different.
interesting element, yes, I absolutely is. It's a very warm personal relationship. I can't remember if they mentioned this in one of the documentaries, but in the book, they wanted Tevye to have something to look at when they were filming this. So they took the equivalent of a fishing line and hung a Jewish star on it and held it at what they thought was the right angle. So when Tevye looked up, it wasn't just kind of looking around, which is in the original shooting of this, he would just be looking at us. We might look around to God, but they wanted him to actually be looking at something specific. Let's see. And he says, this is your friend Tevye. I mean, I love that. This is your friend Tevye. It's not, oh, master of master, king of kings, the Holy One, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is your friend Tevye. And, in one of the early scenes, when the horse is lame, he says, sometimes I think up there, if things get a little slow, God says, I think I'll work some mischief on my friend Tevye. So there's this beautiful sense of closeness. And even says, I'll talk to you later. There's another place, and I don't remember if this is in the movie or it's only in the show, where he's talking to God, and it says, as it says in the Holy Book, and then he stops himself and he says, look who I'm quoting the Holy Book to. And Tevye clearly sees, as you said, that God is super involved in his life. We also start, probably earlier in this, I can't remember. I haven't watched the movie literally through, and it's quite a long time, that there is this evolving relationship between Tevye and Golda, which is a really interesting subtext of the film. And it's quite warm and intimate in an Ashkenazi kind of way. I can tell you, with a Sephardic wife, it's not a Sephardic kind of relationship between Tevye and Golda, but it's clearly very loving. We'll get to that great song, Do You Love Me? And it's sexual. There's some elements there. Tevye feeds his animals first. So now here's, for me, what is the heart of it? And some of you have your hand raised. What is the most significant thing to Tevye if he were rich? I don't know. There's a couple of
a seat by the eastern wall.
He actually says,
in the synagogue to pray.
Pray
if I
for
were
7
rich,
hours.
I'd have the time that I lack to sit in the synagogue and pray, and maybe have a seat by the eastern wall. I would discuss the holy book with the learned men 7 hours every day. That would be the sweetest thing of all. And that, by the way, if you watch this as many times as I've watched it, that's the super close-up of Tevye. So I remember seeing this, and I don't know if it was the show or the music. I worked in the Catskill Mountains every summer of my life I lived in the Catskills every summer of my life from about age 5 to about age 21, and I worked, and there would be these entertainers, and after Fiddler, they all did songs from Fiddler. And I remember just being impressed with this concept that if this guy was rich, the sweetest thing of all would be to study 7 hours every day. And I now believe firmly that he's right. That to me is the sweetest thing of all. I went to rabbinical school for 5 years. I had many classmates who were younger than I was. I had classmates who were moaning and groaning about all the work. I felt like I was, in a candy store for 5 years. I had these astounding scholars with whom I could learn for 5 years full-time, first year in Jerusalem. This was not a big problem for me.
Many of the yeshiva bochers feel the same way.
Yes. And I would say, once again, falling back on that, I think we're almost genetically bred for that. He also talks about this idea, of God being in a vast eternal plan. Let me just call on a few more people. Patty and Richard.
This is in a response to your question about the relationship between Tevye and God.
Mhm.
And the very last moment of the If I Were a Rich Man song, Tevye gets through his thing. And what does he do? He steps in some cow poop.
Yes, yes.
I think there
Yeah.
is this sense of humor and kind of like a humorous resignation to
Yes.
what life is all about. And
Yeah.
it's that the little details like that are so magnificently done in this movie. It's
In
one after
one-
another.
In 1 second, he is addressing God's vast eternal plan,
Yes.
and the next second, he's stepping in it. It's
Yeah.
it's very funny. I'm not. So I have Bonnie. You have your hand up. Barb and Hal have your hand. Nope, you just didn't take it down. I will. I think I can take that down. Maybe I can. Yeah, lower hand. Barbara Lachter.
Lasher.
Lasher, sorry.
Okay. Actually, it's Lacher. But
Maybe we're mishpacha.
yeah, Laugher. Yeah. But what I was going to say in response to the stepping in the cow poop, I don't know if it's Jewish, but isn't there something if you step in poop, you're going to get money?
Yes, and so the requirements to clean up dog poop is really a conspiracy. It's really the anti-Semites. So I ought to give a class. I have a one-time lecture on Jewish superstition, which is really fun. So I'll do that sometime. But there's a lot of. I never heard that superstition, but there's a lot of good ones. Bryce.
Bryce, you're on mute.
Bryce, you have your hand up. Or Barbara, Hal.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Go ahead.
So anyway, one of the things that occurs to me as I watch this and as I remember the film from having seen it multiple times, that part of this evolution is that Tevye is, even though he does everything he's supposed to do and he's on an intimate relationship with God, everything about his life unravels and he has to adapt, and he does successfully.
And so again, I would say, as some of you have observed, this is a microcosm of the Jewish people. And, they, for about 3,000 years or so, the nations of the world have been trying to get rid of us, and they haven't. And the reason they haven't is because of God and our relationship with God. I want to stress, God may not exist. That's irrelevant to the discussion. Our relationship with God is what has kept us alive for all these millennia as a people. We're approaching 8:30. I want to make a couple more observations about this song. And this song deeply affected me. One of the reasons I'm so focused on this, when I went to rabbinical school, I had a teacher who I won't mention, who talked about Judaism in the last century or so, and we talked about Shalom Aleichem. And by the way, Shalom Aleichem, if you read his stories, they are much more like the end of this film than the beginning of the film. If you read his stories, they're very dark, and they're not pleasant at all. And my teacher was referring to this idea that there's kind of a lot of kish and humor, and that there's really not great significance. But I knew how these thoughts affected me. So part of this is sort of my response to my teacher on that. But as they were developing the show, and there were a lot of songs that were in and out, and they tried to tighten up the act. And it's this film is 3 hours long, and the show, it was not a short show. So one of the things, at one point in time, the lyricist Harnick proposed cutting the verses about the synagogue and being the sweetest thing of all. And Zero Mostel protested, "If you change that," he boomed, "you don't understand this man." Harnick yielded and said later, "He saved me from myself." This is Zero Mostel. And he, in another book, they extended the quote. He said, Mostel talking to Harnick, "You don't understand this man. This is about a man who is deeply religious and who wishes he had the opportunity to go to the synagogue and really have a good seat by the Eastern Wall, but he can't afford it. He's exhausted every evening, but he comes home and tries to read a little of the Bible, and he falls asleep. That's this man. You must change. You mustn't change the ending of it. There was another story in one of the books I read that, and you see it in the film, when Mazel was going in and out of his home on stage, he would put his hand up and kiss the mezuzah. You know the tradition, whenever you enter or leave a room that has a mezuzah, you should touch the mezuzah and kiss it. You're actually not kissing the mezuzah, you're taking the holiness from the mezuzah to your lips. And the director said, what are you doing? It seems rather odd. So Zero Mastel explained it to him, and the director said, I don't want you doing that. And of course, Zero Mastel kept doing it. And the guy got more and more angry. He said, I absolutely forbid you to do that. So what did Mastel do? When he entered and exited his room, this is during rehearsals, instead of kissing the mezuzah, he started crossing himself. And that actually got him permission to kiss the mezuzah. Another story about the making of the film, it doesn't come through at all, but Topol reports that when he filmed this song, he had a terrible, terrible toothache. And it kind of reminds you the show must go on. By the way, Zero Mastel had very bad, I think from a accident, problems in his legs, and there were times he could barely walk. But when he went on stage, he was fine. And of course, he was a very, very physical actor. It's just about 8:30, so I am going to wrap up. I definitely don't want to get into the next song. We don't really have time to do it justice. So I want to thank you. We had 85 people here. I'm blown away. And I am humbled, and I appreciate it. I hope this works. As you see, I'm trying to do a little bit of a mix of, being the rabbi and being the moderator and showing this wonderful, wonderful material. So any last comments before at least I stop the recording that people want to mention? No. Okay, so I am going to stop the recording.